Mr Medic with a question, please.
Thank you, President. My question is for the Minister for the Environment. PFAS has now been officially linked to harmful health effects, including cancer. The announcement supersedes previous advice from the federal government, claiming the risk of PFAS to human health as minimal. PFAS-contaminated wetlands pose a unique threat to humans who shoot ducks. A 2018 study by the EPA concluded that no waterfowl from a cloud morass or heart morass should be consumed, and the consumption of waterfowl from Hospital Swamp should be restricted. In recent correspondence with a senior advisor for the EPA, it was confirmed that this advice remains current today. Not only is recreational duck shooting still permitted on all of the above wetlands, the wildlife game regulations require responsible hunters to immediately retrieve down birds, harvesting at least the breast meat for consumption. It is simply not possible to abide by the wildlife game regulations while also complying with the EPA warning. How does the government propose duck shooters simultaneously comply with the wildlife game regulations and the EPA warning?
Minister.
Thank you, President, and I thank Mr Medic for his question, and his question, which is that, which sounds to many members of the community completely counterintuitive. The heart of his question is the health and safety and well-being of shooters, because last time he asked that question, last time he asked a question of a similar ilk, Mr Borman wasn't in the chamber. And this time Mr Borman is probably thrown by the construct of the question to know that the constituency that's very near and dear to his heart is being protected by your question in terms of making sure that anybody who takes action in Victoria, regardless of whether they're complying with one regulation or whether they're complying with another law, they should make themselves totally aware of the consequences of acting with any of those regulatory environments. And make sure that they take action themselves to protect their health and safety. And the advice in which they rely on about whether they consume any product that is actually subject to either public health warning or EPA warning, or what the environmental standards that may be affecting the quality of the wetlands and the species that habitat them. The answer to your question is pretty clear, really, at one level. It's Mr Borman's members who, and his constituency who actually appraise themselves of these dangers, these risks, and make their judgment accordingly. Apart from that, if there is a potential discrepancy between the regulatory environment which is administered by my colleague, the Minister for Agriculture in this context, and the Minister for the Environment in relation to EPA regulations, then I will encourage them to have some consideration and some conversations about the way in which the regulatory environment can be reconciled. Otherwise, any shooter should be aware of this potential risk that they place themselves to determine their own sense of that risk and act accordingly.
Mr Medic, supplement.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Minister. And my supplementary question is, will the government close wetlands with known PFAS contamination?
Minister.
The President, that falls into the domain of my colleagues that again straddle this responsibility between the Game Management Act and the environment portfolio in relation to environmental standards and the quality of the natural environment, the water that's contained in that environment, and the species that live there. And as a consequence of this, those decisions should be made at a management level, and protocols and the relative weighting that should be given to these matters should be considered by those agencies and resolved within those portfolios, rather than me arbitrate them on my feet.